you for inviting me in and to let me be a part of today's session. I've really, truly been looking forward to this. There's something that, create the great highlight for the day. This happens to be the one for the whole week for me. Yeah, I'm from Toledo. Long and short of my story is I think I've always been very interested in well-being and, happy people, happy performance, successful performance at work. And after several different chapters of career, I think I've found myself working with and being in the kind of role that capitalizes on all those passions and interests. And today just hope to share some of what people have taught me through the years and some tools that may be helpful for you in this truly unimaginable time. Like, it's crazy. And I do have 3 kids. One is home with me now. She's a senior in high school. That's a whole nother story. Those of you who have kids who are hitting all those milestones, and to have them sort of like just truly wiped away, that's hard. And then I have one in Columbus who's unemployed, a son. He's graduated a year ago. He's finding his way. He's social distancing and staying at home and trying to, find creative outlets right now. And then another daughter who's here, a junior at UT, trying to master this online learning, which is, it's a whole different world for her, as I'm sure it is for many. So that's all good. And my husband is a teacher, so he's teaching from home. I always say, you're teaching, he's doing a lot of things, but today is our 26th wedding anniversary. So we were kind of joking around this morning, like, woo, what a unique time to be in. So yeah, it's wonderful to share just a couple of thoughts. And I've been talking a lot in the work world at Integrate. We help companies and leaders and organizations kind of address or solve their people problems through data. And in particular, I've been very committed to emotional intelligence data and have more recently added behavioral data to that. So when I think about just, how we're naturally wired, the things we are sort of how we do our work naturally, in times like this, those natural drives are just amplified. They're very amplified. And I see it in myself. I see it in other people. We have these, for example, if you're more of a dominant person like I am, there's an extreme tendency to want to control and think forward and think strategically. And that's all good and well, but it doesn't necessarily help you address what's happening right now. If you're a person who's lower in dominance, you may find yourself withdrawing further inside or kind of holding back your thoughts and ideas, just feeling uncertain about contributing something that may rock the boat. Those are just some simple examples. I happen to have little to no patience. It's just this drive to move and have action. So at times like this, there's a definite angst and antsiness that comes from, not really having those outlets and places to go that we're used to. So I think that's the first point is, number one, don't be surprised if you notice about yourself that you're being more of sometimes what we would consider an unhealthy version of your natural drives. It's default. It's kind of what happens to us until we manage it. The second point is, emotions are always at play. So whenever we are experiencing life all day long, we're experiencing emotion than thought. So emotion doesn't disappear, and it just because it rears up its ugly head from time to time in a negative way, doesn't accurately represent what's happening. So I think that's the second point is, hey, we've got emotions that are happening, and some of you may just be very adept at identifying what those emotions are and kind of recognizing, what is causing those emotions in light of what's happening. But I just thought it would be helpful to, and I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully you'll be able to see this little graphic that went away. Hold please. This happened last time. Where did it go? All right, let's try a new share. Resume share. No, stop share. Okay, bear with me, it's coming. And let's go here. Bing. There. Okay, can you see that? Nina, can you see that on your screen? Okay, good. So what we have here is, this is actually a graphic that represents the stages of grief, the stages of change. Most recently, I found it very congruent with the stages and phases of disaster, which we are currently facing. So why I think it's super relevant is, there is a tested and researched way in which we typically deal with challenge and change. And it's represented for us here. If you look at stage 1, status quo was all the stuff that we knew before, I don't know, February 29th, March 1st, somewhere in there, even maybe it back a little bit. But, as the world as we know it began to drastically change and the data and information began to come forward about the devastating impact of this pandemic, the status quo ended. For some of us, that denial was perhaps evident. I know I heard it in my parents, my older parents. I heard it a lot of different ways where people said, you know what, we're just going to be business as usual until we know otherwise. Some of us said, hey, I've got to be able to help. So a sense of heroic effort came forward, perhaps a rise in our energy. Let's see what we can do. But, once that sort of wears off, and I believe that it has begun to kind of wear off, we find ourselves in a state of disbelief and then dipping down. So the graphic as it rolls down and moves into stage 2 represents for us a dip in vitality, a dip in focus, in productivity, in well-being, in emotional stability, all the things that really define, our health and our vitality tend to take that incredible dive down. And we experience things like fear, trepidation, fright, anger, frustration. And at the bottom of that dip, if you will, the end of that stage 2 is something that could be very devastating: depression, detachment, apathy, the sense of sort of giving up or losing hope. So we know that when challenge and change happens, these are definitive stages that we kind of have to experience. It'd be awesome if we could swing from here all the way over to here right away. But that's not going to happen. So many of you have encountered loss. You're currently experiencing loss. We've had changes, even good changes, changes in employment, changes in our home, changes in our family dynamics. Those can be actually good things, but we still experience some of these same emotions. So a couple of interesting things to note. I think it was for me, maybe about a week ago, when it kind of really sunk in that this is not going away anytime soon, and that this sense of chaos and uncertainty is going to continue, that I did feel a true presence in this disruptive stage 2. But notice that there's just this fine line between frustration and creativity. And so I'm guessing some of you have already, and maybe have been throughout, experiencing what happens here in stage 3. So this is a time of, still it's uncertain. We don't know where things are going to end up. We don't know really in the big picture what this all means for each of us personally, for our families, for our businesses, for our missions, etc. But we feel a renewed or an increasing sense of energy. And along with that comes vitality and increased focus and increased well-being. So in this stage 3, we see things like creativity, acceptance, and hope. I love that word, hope. One of the skills of emotional intelligence is optimism. And oftentimes I hear people equate optimism with faith. And it is, but it's truly this sense of hope. It's undeniable when you feel that. But I just notice how it doesn't take much to move from a darkened state of disruption in phase 2 to that exploration phase 3. And moving on up the scale, then eventually, even if we don't know exactly what the heck is going to be happening, 6 months or 12 months from now, we can experience a focus and a commitment to a new beginning. So these are the stages of grief. These are the stages of disaster management. But here's the other interesting thing, and I don't know about you, but I've been experiencing this. I ask people, hey, how are you feeling? I'm up and down. Really, I think it's more, I'm around and around. that, if we're thinking about this scale and how we move through it, going from, a bad piece of information that we hear on the news, which, by the way, I have totally turned off the news cold turkey. I've just pushed it away. I do read some articles, on my phone through LinkedIn and other things, but the information I was receiving, as, accurate as it may or may not be, was not helping my cause. So that's, feeling some fear and angst. I think about my kids, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing to stay safe? We can in one moment feel extreme panic about, oh my gosh, what if myself or someone I love dies? And then in the next moment, feel intense gratitude and joy. I just had the best conversation with my grandmother, for example. I just, had an encounter in nature. I'm spending more time with my kids than I ever thought possible. I've had a personal breakthrough. I just feel so grateful, for example, for whatever it might be. So, whoa, intense emotion, powerful emotion in this sort of vortex or, whirlwind, if you will, whirlpool. So that's kind of the reality that we may live in. I share all this just to say self-awareness is so key. And, some of us as women, many of you are just more naturally practiced at that. You're more skilled at identifying what you feel and why you feel that way. But the bonus of being able to do that is to just appreciate, hey, here I am in these 4 phases. Here I am in the whirlpool. Is this a place I want to stay? And if it's not, then we can access the tools that we need, to cope with that. So I'm going to just jump ahead here. And if I can get my little screen to move out of the way. There we go. So the skills of emotional intelligence do come in handy. And, if nothing else, let's just know that we all have emotional intelligence. We have it in various degrees, and we have it in ways that are congruent with our natural behavioral drives. So those of us who have high dominance, we're naturally higher in assertiveness. Those of us who have low patience are naturally lower in impulse control, as an example. The skills, though, these are the things that help us deal with the demands and pressures of life. I'm going to go back one more too. Recently listened to a quick webcast from Gallup. I like to read the research that they're doing, and they've been doing quite a bit of it since COVID became an issue. But the people, for those of you that lead others, they've determined pretty specifically in their research that people and followers need these 4 things right now: trust, compassion, stability, and hope. And, without having time to get into each of those, I think we can evaluate for ourselves, in what ways am I able to provide that for people? I mean, you have to trust to be able to give trust. You have to trust others. Compassion comes from a sense of heart. So these are some things that I think are valuable. So here are these skills of emotional intelligence. And while they're, significant all in their own right, these 5, I think, are the most essential right now. We call these the big 5. Emotional self-awareness, for the reasons that I just described. Empathy, which is that understanding of another person. We can read and kind of intuit or identify their experience, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, without judging it. So that's what empathy is. Some of you are very naturally predisposed to be empathic and to be very tuned into other people, sometimes at the expense of yourself. Assertiveness. I love this definition. Say what you mean what you say, and not say it mean. And why is assertiveness so essential right now? Because information is power, and the way in which we communicate information kind of makes all the difference. So assertiveness is that middle ground between not saying anything and saying too aggressively, what your opinion is. It's in the middle where we're sharing information, for the benefit of the person or the group. This takes practice. I mean, I practice this one all the time. Reality testing, another really significant competency right now. It is our ability to be present to this moment and to what is happening right now. And this is difficult. I was thinking, and reflecting before today, how about almost every mechanism or means by which I don't deal with my feelings has been removed. So all the things I typically do, a few haven't though. The refrigerator's still there. And well, my family's still here, and sometimes they are the bearers of my intensity. But reality testing is kind of allowing yourself to get present to what is. Some of that is emotion, but some of that is just the facts of what's happening. And many of us spend most of our time thinking about how we wish it could be, or how it will be in the future, or how it used to be in the past, or how it isn't fair that it isn't this way now, instead of just saying, here's what is now. And using that information then, to connect us to the options that we have in that moment. So reality testing is important right now. And especially if you can bring with that skill a sense of calm. Some of you are very measured and consistent and stable and nice and very opposite me. And those are the kind of energies and drives we need to accompany this reality testing. Then last but not least, impulse control. And what I'll say here is, just as a general society, we don't do very well with impulse control. We are so now wired for immediate response and immediate gratification. So impulse control is the ability to hit the pause button before you think, speak, spend, drink, act, whatever it happens to be. It's just the ability to stop and say, okay, wait, what's happening here? And so these 5 skills, I think, can serve us, and we all have them to various degrees. You might find that one or another provides a more important muscle to build right now for you. But if we talk about emotional self-awareness, just one other quick notion. Hey, just so I know, Nina, how much time do I have left? Oops, I'm gonna go this way. Okay. I'm gonna keep going. So how do we do this? How do we perfect our ability to, understand and deal with emotions? How do we increase that self-awareness? And, this is a practice probably one of you taught me years ago, but it's valuable and it works. Being able to name the emotion. And, outside of mad, sad, angry, and glad, we can appreciate that there is a depth and breadth of emotion that we haven't ever really put words to, but that we experience all the time. So I think being able to write down what you're feeling, and even here's another step that I think sometimes we don't think about. Just be able to appreciate or breathe, accept that emotion without judging it. So how often it is that we identify, I'm pissed, or I'm afraid, or I'm deeply saddened. But there's some judge and jury in the mind that immediately says, well, that's stupid, or how weak, or you're not supposed to feel that way. Good people don't feel that way. There's some kind of judgment that happens almost immediately, sometimes when we do identify those emotions. So name it, try to fire the judge and jury in your head and move that judgment to the side so that you can kind of get clean and clear on why you feel that way. I can tell you that when you understand your natural behavioral drives, you can then begin to predict and anticipate situations and encounters where you will get triggered. So a lot of the emotion I know that I feel comes from the needs of those 4 drives of mine. I have a need to be accepted and important. And if any part of that gets challenged, the feelings that I have range from disillusionment and disenchantment to fear to shame, etc. So just knowing that connection is powerful, and I'm going to share why in a minute. And then last but not least, using some of the tools you may have to manage the emotions. So just writing it down sometimes is powerful, and understanding the why and reflecting on that. For us women, being able to communicate and talk about that with a trusted friend or associate also is we just need to get it out and express it, which is one of the reasons why empathy and patience are so important. We need to listen to one another and not fix or, not try to coach unless it's invited, but really just to let people let the women express what they think. So if I go one step further, here's a tool. And this may sound or may be familiar to you. It goes back to Albert Ellis in the days of cognitive behavioral therapy. You might have learned about this in college in your psychology class, but it's the ABCs of emotion. And the simple notion here is that stuff that happens doesn't create how we feel. It's our thoughts and our beliefs about it. So our job just got a little more complex, apparently, because stuff happens. The activating events that we experience, we don't have control over that. We do have, though, a set of thoughts and beliefs that happen, sometimes below our conscious awareness. And the consequence of those two things together are the feelings that we have. So it's not just that somebody said something and I felt this way. It's the spin that I put on it with my thoughts and beliefs. And I came up with a couple of just examples. I shared these yesterday in a webinar we did at the Chamber for leaders and business owners. So if the activating event is shelter in place, the thought or belief might be, there is no end in sight. Like, this is going to be devastating. The resultant feeling is anxiety and panic. I think another example, employees being laid off or losing their job. The leader or the person in charge may say, "I've failed." You may think, we should have been ready for this. And the resultant feelings there, shame, guilt, and feeling incapable. I can't hear you, Nina, if you're talking.
No, I'm not, but you are good on time. You have about 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So if we go back to the shelter in place, what we have the opportunity to do, this is a tool we can use. And I know for a fact, because I know some of you who are on here, you're very good at this, and you're very good at doing this for other people. We just have to remember when we need to do it. So if we look at shelter in place, and we think about, rather than saying, this is awful, it's never going to end, it's going to be devastating, we could reframe that to say, I have what I need right now, and what I'm doing today is actually one of the best things I could do at saving lives. The resultant feeling then is maybe one of feeling fortunate. I feel fortunate to be able to do what I do from home, for example. I feel content, like I have what I need. I really don't want for anything right now. So those are just some ways to reframe that. When it comes to people losing their jobs, I've done, and for anything that feels like it has a negative outcome, like you failed in some way, you could say, I've done the best I can with what I know right now. I've done the best I can with what I know right now, which can maybe lead to a feeling of intention and being intent on, working hard to continue to find a good resolution, or feeling determined. So those are very different emotions. They create a very different energy. They're probably the difference between stage 2 and stage 3 in our phases of grief. So last idea here. So we're hearing our leadership, we're hearing many people, even hearing ourselves talk about all that we're concerned about. And truly, there is much to be concerned about. The challenge with everything that we're afraid of and obsessed about and really, thinking about is that it's out of our control. We have no control over most of the things that we're highly concerned about. We can do a couple things. We can move those issues, or like just stop focusing on them. For example, the governmental leadership. If you have concerns about how this is being handled, unless you have a straight shot to the White House or anywhere else, that may not be something we or you can control. We need to stop focusing on that. But if there are things you can control, or perhaps influence, we kind of bring those into that circle of influence. But what I want to talk most about is what can fit inside of that circle of control. And I've heard a lot of people talk about this, focus on what you can control right now. So a couple ideas here, and I'm hoping maybe you have others. We can control what we consume, for sure. And I mean everything. The media, what we read, what we watch, what we eat, what we drink, what we smoke, you name it, what we listen to, we can control that. And I'm here to tell you that you can turn the channel. You can switch from the negativity. And I have a dear friend, every day I tell her, stop looking at Twitter, like get off of Twitter, because she just goes off on a tangent and she's so distressed. So we can control what we consume. We can. How you communicate with your colleagues, your team, your family, or your friends, we also can control that. We have a whole host of ways in which we can stay connected, should we choose to help us deal with the sense of isolation we may feel. We can control our attitude. And I think our attitude is the byproduct of successfully managing some of those stage 2, some of those very challenging and very scary emotions. We can also use our tools to make sure that we're staying in touch with how we feel, and we're doing what we can to manage that. As an example, just this week, I was thinking, had I encountered this experience that I just had without all the Corona stuff happening, would I have still felt the same way? And the answer was yes, but not as intensely. So I got a nice sort of, hey, it was nice to meet you and your company. Thank you for your presentation. We're moving in another direction. And I was crushed and devastated. Was that more magnified because of what's happening right now? Yeah, probably. But I know what tools I need to use to deal with that. In fact, some of the tools I typically would use, which would be to pivot right to the next project, or get hard at work at the other thing I was working on, those aren't available right now. So I just had to kind of walk my way through it, use the tools. Your sleep. For a lot of reasons, women don't sleep as much as men, and we know probably a lot of those reasons firsthand. But this is something we could devote our effort and energy. Hopefully some of you are experiencing sleep in a whole new way because of the structure of work now and being at home. But if you're not, this is something to get some help with, because it does really diminish our ability in all the other areas. And then certainly, how you spend your time. It's okay to say no, no to a conversation. You have to put your mask on first. In fact, that was the subject of a conversation yesterday we had. We've always said, when you're in an airplane and the oxygen mask comes down, they tell you put your mask on first. And it's literally, you have to put your own mask on first so that you can do what you do and lead the way you lead and love the way you love and be present for your family and for the people who matter. So that's what I have for you today. Here's just a nice summary. I won't go through it, but it just puts it all on the line for you, the things that we talked about. And as a follow-up, I just, if anybody would benefit from understanding how your natural behavioral drives may map over to these skills of emotional intelligence, I have some time. I don't, make burritos to serve the healthcare workers. Not building hospitals right now. I'm not sewing masks. I am available to help with this. Happy to do that for you, just as a friend and as a complimentary way to keep us moving along. So should you have interest in that, let's connect. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Sara. This is a great presentation. So right now, I'm gonna change the viewing. Yes, and then let's address a couple of the questions here and couple comment. I'm just gonna start. Sara, can you talk more about the 4 drive that you mentioned earlier?
Mm-hmm. Dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. And there really are only 4 natural drivers. There are many psychometric tools that measure those drives, the DISC, the Myers-Briggs, the Hogan. There's plethora of amazing tools out there. I happen to use the predictive index, which takes in a very simple way a close look at what those drives are and what they describe about what you need. Okay. Dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality.
Okay. Okay. Also, any of us also can contact you if we want to learn a little bit more, because I know you offer just now for the emotional intelligence, also for PI. Okay.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
Okay. Thank you, Brandy, for that question. Also, is this from Judy? She said, can we see the slides again that show trust, compassion, and 3 other things, please?
Yes. Here, I'll go back to it.
And perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more. Trust.
Yes. Actually, I'm happy to do that. If I can find it. There we go. Here, let's just, I need to share my screen. Hang on one second. The joys of technology. Where's my little dude? Okay, you got really small. There we go. Now I'm big. And now I'm going to share my screen. It did it again. Dang it. Well, bear with me, friends.
No worries. Technology.
Okay, now can you see those?
Yes, we can see the brain.
Okay. So I'm going to go right to, so this information came from a webcast that Gallup did last week. And really in their research, these ideas of trust, compassion, stability, and hope came forward as some of the most essential things that leaders and companies can be providing their employees. But how do you do that? I will share this way. Let's see if this is gonna, these are 4 of the items from their engagement survey. And most engagement methodology incorporates questions just like this. But I think these become a great guide for any of you who are working with teams, especially even remote teams. You can ask your direct reports, do you know what's expected of me? Or I'm sorry, are you clear on what's expected of you? So trust is kind of built upon this idea of clarity and knowing what's expected, especially for people that have a high degree of drive for precision and accuracy, is very, very helpful. It's very beneficial to get the scope of what do you expect me to do this week and how am I doing with that? So that's a great question to ask your direct reports. Do you have the materials and equipment you need to do your job right now? And if they don't, and if it's possible for you to fix that issue, do it. The engagement and vitality and productivity will increase. I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. This really speaks to job fit. I think situationally, some folks are finding themselves in a unique environment where they're doing something other than that, that which was their natural, sort of regular responsibility. So we're really not talking about situational changes, but, in the long and short of it, if people are not in a job where they're able to capitalize on their natural drives and use those natural drives and do what they do well, they're not going to be sustainable. So it's another good question to ask your direct reports. And lastly, are we clear on the mission? Is everybody kind of tuned in and engaged with the mission and the purpose of our organization? I think here's the important thing to note though. For some of us, the mission changes right now. The mission and the focus has to shift because of the economic downturn and the coronavirus issues. So we got to be communicating that. And if it hasn't changed, we got to be communicating that as well. So those are 4 indicators that would give you an opportunity to build trust, compassion, stability, and hope for people. And as one of my favorite gurus said, even today on a podcast I was listening to, it's Patrick Lencioni of the Table Group. And he wrote the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, The Ideal Team Player, The Advantage, amazing resources. Pat Lencioni, his whole point, which just left my mind, was, hello, brain cramp. Let's see, connected to mission purpose. Oh, now is the time to be human. Now is the time to not be so efficient in our meetings that, we're like robots. Now is the time to spend an hour together on the phone as a team, just talking about how we're feeling and what we're dealing with and appreciating each other. Now is the time to be human and to give grace to people and grace to ourselves.
That's a great one. So I do have a quick question going back to what you just mentioned about, the wellness check-in and things like that. But
Yeah.
How about if you have a leader or someone that is so efficient, then just want to get business done? So how do you really take that time to really space out and say, hey, I got to build this empathy, I got to check in. But then you do have certain team member, I just want to get this work done. What do you need? What do you need to do? So how do you figure it out? Like,
I think it's very natural for some people to default and really, remember I said your natural drives get amplified. So if you're the doer, if you're the implementer, if your comfort comes from having everything in a row and having it all checked off and it's working forward, then that's where you live. I would say a simple exercise, like just creating a Zoom opportunity, not to focus on an agenda or business, but to use a simple exercise. This is a great one. Lencioni has a 13-minute TED Talk on being an ideal team player. And along with that TED Talk, you can also find, I'd be happy to share these in a link too. You can find a little 1-page self-assessment. There are 3 things it takes to be an ideal team player: humble, hungry, and smart. Everybody watches the TED Talk, they come back together and they identify the area that they know they need to work on. Of course, the leader should go first. The leader should always make it safe for everyone by going first. This expresses some vulnerability. It helps highlight our humanity. It helps us tune into one another. It can very quickly expedite our sense of team engagement, but it's also just a time to get real. And there's a little structure to it. So some people don't know how to handle, touchy-feely, or they don't know what to do when people express emotions. So this is a little bit more of a structured format. It's easy, and people will benefit from knowing these ideas from each other.
Good. All right. Thank you. Let me go through some of the group chat. I do have a comment here from Jonelle Massey. She said that I think it's important for all of us to know through more psychological research and current mental health practices that stages of grief are no longer presented as linear, but rather a roller coaster of jumping from the different response of grief. We may skip all but one. Some may race through a few and then repeat a few. It's so important to know this so that we don't think we are doing grief wrong.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. It's like that. I don't know if there was a roller coaster in Cincinnati where it would go forward and then it would go backwards. Like it would go all the way through these big hills and some of them, and then it would come back over others. It is like that. And I think that circular addition to the diagram helps us understand and appreciate that, we don't get to go, okay, all done with phase 1. Now we're in phase 2. Whew, thank God we did that. Now we're in phase 3. Oh, but wait, I don't feel like I'm in phase 3, or I did for a minute and I'm not anymore. It is about accepting and allowing for that roller coaster to take place, because it's very, very natural. And it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It doesn't mean you're failing at coping with the emotions and the grief. There's a lot of grief right now.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think this might relate to that. Maybe you can expand it. It's from Alexis. Any suggestion of action we can take or ways to move from frustration to creativity, or move through the curve faster?
Yeah, I don't know about faster, but I do know, if we can hone in on what the cause of the frustration is, and if it's outside of that scope of control, we've got to figure out a way to manage that emotion and move through it, move into it and through it, because it's not serving us well. Sometimes I got to say too, it's ego-based. I know for me, my ego gets activated a lot. I talked earlier about that strong need to be accepted and appreciated and be important to other people. I used to feel ashamed of that, but it's how God wired me. But now that I know that, I don't let it run the show, except for when it sneaks up and runs the show. And that's my ego saying, oh, you don't matter. And I'm frustrated, or, I wish they'd move faster. That's my need to have action and my low patience. So I think we have to manage those negative emotions in that second phase in the ways that are appropriate. I think getting outside ideas are very helpful there. But moving into creativity could be acting on an idea that you have. It could be, stepping into a phone call or an email or something that you have meant to do for a while, but for whatever reason didn't allow yourself to. So I think what we're looking for is a way to engage in something that brings a sense of purpose back to you. Right before we started this call, I wrote an apology letter to somebody I needed to do this back in, probably November. And it's been on my mind 1,000 times. I started writing that letter and didn't send it and didn't pick up the phone, but I did it today. Now it's over here. I'm going to read it before I actually send it. But, I feel more whole having done that. I don't feel anxious or fearful right now. I feel more engaged and more compassionate and more accepting of myself. So I think those are some of the differences. There's no magic wand, but and I'm guessing some of the women here on this call even have better ideas than I do on that.
Yeah, we do have couple. He said, thank you, Sara. This is an awesome reminder also to be kind to ourselves first, so we can then move forward to help others.
Yeah.
Couple things like Brené Brown, bracing is really great tools to explore trust in team.
Yes.
Yeah.
All her stuff is great. Can I share that she has a new podcast called Understanding Us, I think it is, or some 2 words, It's brand new. There's like 5 episodes, but in the first one, she talks about FFTs. First fucking time, excuse my language. But man, did that resonate? How many of us are really for the first time dealing with a whole bunch of stuff we never dealt with before? Each of those things. So if you think about that change curve, grief, sadness, all that, it's happening in multiple scenarios, all in our same life. So we've got various change curves going on with all these different things. But to be able to say, yeah, of course you're going to freak out, or yeah, of course you're frustrated or upset. This is the first time you've ever dealt with this. So some of you have a strong need to get comfortable and to know what the heck you're supposed to be doing. That just takes time. So we need some patience for ourselves. I'm sorry. Other things. Keep going.
No, it's okay. And I think Tony just checked Brene Brown podcast, and I know she updated on the LinkedIn too. And she have a shorter version with a really keynote for all of us too. Thank you. All right. I'd like to open up for any other question. How about thank you, Sarah. I'm gonna pause the recording so we can have more engaging conversation.